Welcome and welcome to our Middle East update with Mark Silverstein, who is a South African native who grew up in La Jolla for over 30 years. And he studied at the University of California, San Diego and Tel Aviv University, graduating with a BA in economics and a minor in Middle Eastern studies. Mark's early career included positions with a prominent San Diego real estate finance and development company, as well as the director of public relations at the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles. Mark is married to Tali Silverstein and has 3 children, and he lives in Israel, and he used to come to San Diego at least once a year, and we'd get to see him in person, and this is our second best thing to doing it in person. So welcome, Mark. Hold on, Mark, I gotta unmute you. Ask to unmute, there you go.
Yeah, is that good? Can everyone hear me? All right, perfect. So thank you for having me again. I love being in touch with the community all the way from Israel. It's great. I mean, obviously I would much rather be in San Diego in person, you know, with my kids running around the JCC, but it's good to connect anyway. I'm sure we're all frustrated with Zoom already, but it is better than nothing at this point. So I'd like to just start by talking about a couple of things. So let's just talk about the obvious first, you know, COVID and Corona in Israel. And you can type me questions whenever you want. I'll address them right away. So please do not be shy. Hopefully you'll be even less shy over questions. So I live in Israel. I'm in Israel now. I have a home in San Diego as well. My whole family's there, but my wife and my 3 kids and I live in Israel. And we've been here almost 5 years, full time in a sense, but we bought our house here about 10 years ago. And it's been very interesting to experience, you know, the country through the eyes of an American. You know, I get to compare my family. I got 2 halves of my life. I got my family in the States, my wife's family in Texas, and, you know, we're in Israel, and to see how everyone is handling things is very interesting. But, you know, the situation in Israel now with Corona is getting uncertain in a little bit. And so the reason why I say it is because it's been almost uncanny that, you know, whatever happens in Israel there seems to be a 2 or 3 week delay, and it happens in the States, whether things get worse or better or whatnot. So I almost view Israel for some reason as sort of a little canary in the coal mine a little bit. And so I think it's safe to say that Israel took some very bold decisions early on for COVID, and Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, shut down the economy very strongly, which was shocking to everyone here. It's a very vibrant economy. It's a very international economy. Even on a personal level, you know, Israelis travel a disproportional amount. And so to shut it down was very shocking. And I have to say that for the most part, there was about a 2-month lockdown here where, believe it or not, most Israelis actually followed, you know, the rules, which is very unusual, you know, because it's a society sort of based on questioning things and so forth. But, you know, there was a, you know, obviously you always have, you know, in the beginning, there's people that don't, and you always have stories about people that don't. But for the most part, it was eerily bizarre here in Israel. And, you know, for those of you who've been here for the high holidays, it wasn't quite Yom Kippur where the streets are literally deserted, but it was Rosh Hashanah where the streets were pretty empty for the most part. And so it was unique to see. And even, you know, we live next to a 20,000 person Arab town here. And, you know, even, you know, the Arab community in Israel was praised by this government for what they've done, you know, and the steps they took. So the numbers, you know, after a month started declining and declining and declining to the point where, you know, it almost got to 0 cases per day. It got to a dozen cases per day and whatnot. And, you know, I think what happened is the same that happened everywhere else, is that it's very hard to slowly open up things. You know, once, you know, you keep people inside for a certain amount of time, and they're just going to come bursting out. And so, once they started to loosen up here, people just came bursting out. And, sure, that there's a pretty high degree of, at least where I live in my town, there's a pretty high degree of mask use. Every single store takes your temperature. I even drove by my kids' school today, and the kids were practicing a big dance routine, several classes, and they were spread out over this massive court, and they were all 2 meters apart, with their chairs and so forth. And the situation here is that, for the first 2 weeks, things stayed pretty stable. I would say even eerily stable, because, to see cases go down after being locked down and then to open up, and to see no rise, it was a little bit weird, to be honest with you, because it doesn't really make sense, because everyone is suddenly out. But then, lo and behold, the cases started going up. I think at the height of it here, just to put it into perspective, Israel's 9 million people. At the height of it here, there were 6 or 7, I think 600 to 800 new cases a day. And at the bottom of it, I told you there was less than 10. And now, basically, it's hovering between the 150 and the 200 mark a day of new people that are being infected. And the criteria which the government has laid out to avoid additional lockdowns or reimposing of lockdowns have basically been to stay below that 200 people getting infected a day mark. And we're right around there, between, there was one day it got over, but since it's been there. So there's definitely still apprehension out there. There's definitely, people are still very aware of it. Obviously it depends where you go in the country and what communities, but it's definitely out there. In terms of international travel, the airport is still completely shut down. Anyone that flies into Israel, they're required to 2-week quarantine here, and they are checking. They do monitor you and check you. Whether it's, I've heard stories from friends of mine who have been in quarantine. They've come to your building window and made you come to the balcony to see you that you're home, or they've knocked on your door, and obviously they're tracking you on your cell phones. And so, some people are getting text messages saying you were in this supermarket next to someone that was, infected, so you have to go into quarantine. And so they've done a pretty effective job here. Obviously things could be better, but the country is still reeling, economically. There's no doubt about it. The country is still reeling economically, like everywhere. Unemployment rate is projected to settle at around 10% by the end of the year, after being, the lowest in Israel's history, almost fully employed. And then it shot up to 20%, but, huge amounts of people are going back to work every week here. But, clearly the travel and the tourism industry, will not recover for a while. Israel is a massive tourist destination. So we're planning to come to the States this summer in a month, exactly a month from today. We'll see if we'll be in a position to go. We are assuming we will have to quarantine for 2 weeks with our 3 kids when we get back. And that's unfortunate. It's tough, but we want to get to the States and to see our family and so forth. We always thought a war, or God forbid something, would stop us from leaving Israel, but to think that it would be a virus is obviously unheard of. And at the same time, Israel is, I have to say that the healthcare system here has really proved itself tremendously. It's an amazing system. It's not perfect, but it is an amazing system. And the doctors have learned a tremendous amount more about how to treat COVID than they did, at the beginning. And there's one thing you could say about Israel, which is a clear advantage, in that this is an extremely adaptable country, and you see this. People are used to dealing with adversity and powering through it. They're used to, moving forward with their normal everyday life without being shocked, or without, making a big deal out of it. So for people to figure out, wear masks, or to wear gloves, or get your temperature taken, or to figure out how to get their business operating in this environment. It's work from home. It doesn't seem to be a big deal. So, things are tough, but this is an extremely resilient economy here, extremely. And so I'm optimistic about what happens here. Now, obviously, if things get carried away and out of control and there's a huge second wave, then that's a different story, who knows? But so far, no one knows if we're in the middle of a second wave, if this is the peak of it, if this is the beginning of it. So it's tough to tell. But one thing is clear is that we're all, our life is not going to return to any sense of normalcy until we get some sort of vaccine, which Israel is one of the countries that's working on it.
Mark, I accidentally unmuted everybody again. Will you please unmute yourself?
I did. How long have I been muted? Oh,
Maybe,
and now I can't hear anyone.
Maybe 2 sentences.
Oh, okay. So if anyone would like to ask a question about COVID in Israel, please do. One thing is for certain that,
We'll put
life
it in the chat. Put it in the chat.
Yeah, put it in the chat. One thing for sure is that, it appears that life won't get back to normal until there is a vaccine. And, Israel is one of the places that has several vaccines that it's working on. It's clear that the full resources of the government are directed towards working on a vaccine. And that's what they're doing. And we'll see. There's going to be a big rush to see, a vaccine at this point is a matter of national security for every country. Any country that gets it first is going to have a strategic advantage over everyone else. And so Israel is definitely one of the countries that, views getting a vaccine and a reliable vaccine first. It's very aggressive about that. And so we'll see what happens. Someone just asked, are all businesses open? Yes, all businesses are open here. The country's been pretty wide open for a while. Restaurants are open. You have to sit outside and spread out. But there's a lot of casual dining here. There's not as much formal eating here. The only thing that is not fully operational here is the public transportation. And so it's open on a more limited form. It's like a catch-22. If you only open it on a limited, basis, then whatever is open gets overcrowded. So that's a tough spot to be in. But other than that, all businesses are open. In the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I can't think of a situation where a business hasn't been open. Someone just said this isn't the second wave. Bottom line is that the health director of Israel came out today and said, we have no idea if this is the beginning, end, or even the second wave at all. No one knows. I think there's one thing that's become clear is that most predictions about what we know about this haven't been true, and so no one really knows. The States, it's more challenging there for a couple of reasons. That you've got 50 states, and in Israel you've got 1. And there's 9 million people living in a fairly concentrated area, and it's pretty easy to implement policy over all 9 million people. So it's a little bit different in the States. You've got 50 different states, a lot of different cultures and political views and so forth. And so it's more challenging in the States. I will say something though, and this is just my opinion, that if you look around the world, I really think that the countries' responses to this coronavirus have been very interesting, and I think that one of the key things that mattered was sort of the strength of the social fabric in a society. And underneath all the disagreements, the political, the religious, everything, in Israel there still is a strong sense of social fabric that connects people. Whether it's through circumstances like wars or whatnot, or just purely economic success, or religious connection or whatnot. And you really saw that social fabric, keep the country going. whereas in the States, I kind of felt like, there was, and in some other countries in Europe and in, whatnot, it really started to pull at the social fabric, in terms of these debates about freedom and everything. And so it was interesting to really see the strength of the Israeli society be on full display for 2 months. I can say that even if the second wave is bad, I do not believe that this country or most countries will tolerate a full lockdown again. I think the feeling is that, listen, if things are bad, we got to pinpoint where they're bad and close it down. And that's what they're doing. Here, one of the biggest hotspots, if you can believe it, is schools. The schools are unbelievable. So it's popped up in schools like my kids' schools and so forth. And there's a lot of concern about the teachers here. And so, so they've closed down several dozen schools across the country where one person tests positive, and they send the entire school into quarantine. They go in and they clean the school and so forth. So there's a big concern about schools. And to this gentleman's question, I'll explain that in a second. To this gentleman's question, about second wave or first wave, there's an article saying, they don't know if the schools are a hotspot, meaning they're starting at the schools or spreading through the schools, or the schools just a symptom of the wider population, of what's happening, of the wider population, and that there is a big second wave out there and the schools are just a symptom. Time will tell. It's been a week that we've hovered around this 150 to 200 cases a day. They publish it twice a day here, and so forth. Someone said, are they checking temperatures at schools before kids enter each day? That's actually been, in a sense, it's heartwarming. It's gut-wrenching, but in another sense, it's amazing to see the adaptability. The schools were great here. We send our kids to public school like most people do here. They just adapt so quickly, no matter whether the rules make sense or not, you can argue that, but basically my oldest kid is required to wear a mask to school the whole day. And my two younger girls have to wear a mask when they're on break, or when we're obviously walking to and from school. And they do check, there's security there, there's community security, so forth. And they take it very seriously. They've opened up 3 exits to the school instead of 1, so there's no congestion by the exits. And every morning, it's the parents' responsibility to log on to the Ministry of Education's website and to sign an affidavit that your kid doesn't have a temperature or is not showing any symptoms. And I must tell you again, parents are taking that seriously. You don't want to be the one kid to send your one parent to send your kid to school with corona and spread it. And then what happens is, on hanging off each kid's backpack, there's a laminated tag with the kid's name and a barcode on it. And the teacher, first thing every morning, scans the barcode, and that gives the teacher the approval that the parent has signed the affidavit, the health affidavit, every morning. And so it's a pretty organized system, believe it or not. You simply can't take the temperature of a couple thousand kids every morning. It's just not, it's not realistic. And quite honestly, as I said, there are parents that are, keeping their kids, like we kept our daughter home from school for like a tiny little cough. And she gets a cough frequently. But we didn't want to be, we kept her home for 5 days. I think pre-corona time, we would have sent her there the whole time, because it's just a little cough. So people are taking it seriously from that standpoint. But every single place you go, you have to get your temperature taken, and they require you wear a mask. You'll get kicked out. And Tel Aviv, you see stories and you see cafes of people that are mixing without masks. And I'm sure that's true, but the government is cracking down on that. They published that they gave out 400 fines for masks in Tel Aviv, and I'm sure that will do the trick and get people coming. So someone asked, how is the vaccine coming? And the last comment about corona. Listen, I read the same stuff you do. We all read a ridiculous amount of information. We hear that there's 2 vaccines that they're testing for in human trials. And they are, projected to be ready at the best case scenario in September. And in preparation for that, they're already starting to manufacture the vaccine, which is a little bit crazy. Assuming that they get, approval. In terms of the vaccine that Israel's government and the science agencies are working on here, they don't really give so much information. They do talk about breakthroughs, but they don't give too much information about, when it's actually going to be ready and in the public's hands, which I think is okay, because I think it's kind of a national security. I did read today, actually, that Israel is in discussions with this company, Moderna. There's two major vaccines being worked on that are sort of rising to the top in terms of human trials. One coming out of Oxford and one coming out of Boston, this new company, Moderna. And I did hear that Israel was in discussions with them about securing some when they get approval, hopefully at the end of this year. So we're going to be going through the summer. We're going to be like this for a while. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And, we all need to be very careful. I have uncles and aunts your age that are living in a building in Kfar Saba. And it's very nerve-wracking there because a lot of the casualties have come from these type of buildings in Israel. Something like 40 alone have come from these type of buildings out of 300. So it's something that we just need to adjust, and it's going to take a good year of our life to deal with this, which is crazy. So any other questions on Corona before we talk about politics? All right. Okay, so that's the situation with Corona. Overall, I have to say, though, I am very optimistic here about the situation in Israel. I think the country's done great. And, obviously it's not over yet as much as we all want it to be, but so far, knock on wood, so good. I don't think it would be realistic. I don't think any country in the world now has opened up and not seen a spike. Even China now is going through today and seeing a spike, and it doesn't get more strict than that about what they're doing over there. So it's to be expected that there will be a spike, but hopefully it doesn't get out of control again, which is a real concern. Okay, let's talk about politics here. So since the last time we spoke, there's a new government in Israel. There's a unity government, where is Bibi Netanyahu and Benny Gantz came to an agreement on forming a rotational government, which I'll speak about what that means in a second. And basically, there was no choice but for this to happen, because neither Bibi Netanyahu and the entire right wing or Benny Gantz and the entire center and left wing had enough mandates or had enough support from other parties to form a government. So for as much as none of Gantz completely swore off he would never form a government with Bibi, and this is the third election, he would never ever form a government with Bibi, and Bibi can't stand giving up power or dealing with anyone in the center. He likes having power. So both of these men didn't want to do this, but they had no choice, and in the end they did. And basically what they agreed to is a rotational government, which means Bibi would serve as prime minister for the first 18 months, and then after that, Gantz would be given the prime minister after that. And I think, quite honestly, universally, no one thinks Bibi's going to just voluntarily give up power. I think universally that is what people feel. And even now, Bibi with Corona and with his record on the economy, he is popular here. His popularity is strong here, whether we like to admit it or not. And he has demonstrated during Corona strong leadership skills, and especially when you sort of contrast it next to Italy and the UK and the US to some extent. Israel. I think there is a feeling of some pride here about what's happened when you see, just especially in Italy, which is close by. So I think the risk for Gantz is that that Bibi could call new elections, at any time, and, he would win more support than he has now and be able to form a government without Gantz, and so this is why many people here feel that, this government is not going to last very long. It's truly a temporary government. And, on the backdrop of it all, you have, Bibi's corruption trial, which is highly, highly political and contentious. Bibi's taken a page from Trump, or the other way around, where he's kind of put the whole system on trial and not just him. And he believes, he's trying to frame it not about his actions, but about, the actions of the entire right wing and so forth. And so he's truly a man, fighting for his political life. And, he is a very skilled player. And so there is a feeling here that, Bibi is going to find the right time to, and the right pretext to call another election. And hopefully, he'll come out of this stronger than he is now, and not having to be in a national government. So, someone just asked a question about annexation. So this is Bibi's big, push right now. Bibi's big push is he believes that Israel should annex, and this is what I want to spend a lot of time talking about, should annex the Jordan Valley and the major settlement blocks. Okay, so this was an issue in the negotiations over the unity government. It was an issue in the negotiations between Gantz and Bibi, and so Bibi's made this an issue. He feels like it's important. Now the question is why? That's the question everyone's asking. Why? Because there is a tremendous amount of backlash against Israel right now for pushing annexation. Now, on the face of it, if you're Bibi Netanyahu, you're going to say, listen, these major settlement blocks are going to be included in Israel under any future potential agreement. The Jordan Valley is absolutely going to be included from a security standpoint. So we're formalizing stuff that is already somewhat been formalized. And anyone on the right will say to you, listen, what do you expect us to do? The Palestinians have absolutely failed leadership. They're corrupt, and they are, which is true, by the way, and they have done nothing to advance the Palestinian cause. So, all this pressure on Israel just to sit around and wait for the Palestinians to get their act together is BS. And quite honestly, you could make a very good case that the Palestinians' position has greatly eroded on the world stage. In terms of, first of all, they had Obama as president for 8 years, and Obama was very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and the time to do something was then. Number one. Number two, the Arab world at large is basically moving past the Palestinians. There are issues in the Arab world that are way bigger than the Palestinians, mainly Iran, the economic situation, the plunging price of oil, security threats, and all these have basically moved the Arab world past, and let's not even talk about just the domino effect of states failing, Syria and Iraq and Yemen and turmoil in Egypt. There's a lot of issues in the Middle East that the Arab community cares about more than the Palestinians right now. And a lot of these issues have driven the wider Sunni Arab world, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, closer to Israel and not further away. And so there have been like unprecedented, ties between the Arab world and Israel. Not formal ties, but informal ties. There's even been some Israelis taking parts of some Israeli government ministers taking parts of some conferences in Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates has even talked openly about ties with Israel. And I think the biggest proof of these ties came, this week when I think it was the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates published an op-ed in a newspaper here in Israel, basically railing again that, saying that if annexation goes forward, it's going to be a setback for normalization with the Arab world and ties with the Arab world. Now that's shocking in itself because one, United Arab Emirates is publishing op-eds here. Number two, it's inferring that without annexation, everything's great with the Arab world and everything can move forward, And so, the status quo has basically been solidified with the Arab world in terms of the Palestinians. So, there is growing backlash against annexation. So what's Bibi doing? And I don't know, but I can tell you the theories. One theory, which is the most obvious theory, is, listen, Trump could lose in November. He could lose. And, Israel's relationship with the Democrats in the States, and especially this progressive wing, is terrible. And the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is tinged with anti-Semitism, and it's very anti-Israel. And so, if a Democrat wins in November, they are going to, these guys are going to be part of their of the Democratic coalition. I mean, without a doubt. And so, that is the first issue. Simply, listen, we're on the clock. It's June. If we want to do anything before Trump gets out, who's been, favorable to Israeli policy of this government, we need to do something now. So the pressure of Trump, losing might be playing into this. Bibi is smart. He knows that there's going to be tremendous backlash. There was tremendous backlash when the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and Bibi might just be thinking, listen, there's a storm going on in the world with Corona and the economic crisis. There'll be backlash against annexation, but we can take it and it will pass, just like the Jerusalem thing. That could be another combination of events. The other thing is just legacy. If he can be the first prime minister to, annex major Jewish settlement blocks and the Jordan Valley without conceding anything to the Palestinians, then, that might be in his mind. I don't think so. My personal preference is no. I think Bibi will think about legacy when he feels, his time is up. Closer to then his time is up, and I don't think he feels his time is up. The other reason is just simply to pander to the right, before any future election. Meaning, any future election needs Bibi to get more support than he has now. And if he can say that he annexed this or that, he's going to win the right-wing vote by a landslide. And so, this might be setting up, two or three moves down the line. And, the last thing is just leverage. This is the Middle East. Everything costs money. If you say no, it should cost you something. If you say yes, it should cost you something. And so, just to create leverage, the Palestinians lobbed in their own peace proposal against the Trump plan. And, up until now, they hadn't even acknowledged the Trump plan. They think it's terrible. So now all of a sudden, they're lobbing in proposals or whatnot. So it could be used to put out there to gain leverage over something else. We don't know, quite honestly. We don't know. But there is considerable backlash against Israel right now. No one knows if Bibi is going to back down. I think he will. He's already talking about, now annexation might have to be done in stages and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, he's a master negotiator, but there is certainly a strategy involved here, without a doubt. And, hopefully that the consequences here are not too big. Bibi could simply think that the world is too preoccupied or dealing with too many domestic issues to care for annexation for an extended period of time. And so it will come and go. And with Trump president, this is his time. So who knows? I don't know what's going to happen, but it's certainly going to be interesting. And I think in the end, it will not be as bad as people think, because people have so much on their plates domestically. Any other questions about that before we start talking about a couple of other things? And I'm not sure. Okay. You know, I think that's it. But in terms of the annexation, the political, you know, the political situation here, I think, you know, the government, the next big fight that people are speculating that Bibi might use as a, you know, as a way to blow up the government is the budget negotiations. I think every country in the world is going to have a terrible time passing the next budget that they have to pass. Because, you know, there are so many priorities that have been created in society all over the world that there is going to be some massive cuts that need to be made and some massive, you know, investments that are going to need to be made above and beyond the stimulus packages that are out there already. So, you know, and in Israel, because there's such a budget battle all the time, by law, they're required to pass a 2-year budget and not a budget every year, which is actually a great law here. And so that is going to come up in August, that budget battle. And so, you know, there are going to be serious cuts that are going to have to be made. There's going to be arguments between the defense establishment, between, you know, the education, Ministry of Education, and there's going to be tremendous, and you can bet, you know, your bottom dollar that Bibi is going to maneuver himself that, you know, other people are responsible for the government blowing up, and the budget negotiations are just such a good way of doing it. So I think if there will be new elections called, I think it's likely going to be August, September, in the midst of these budget negotiations, which are going to be brutal in all countries, including in the States at the end of the year. Any other questions about that? Because that's about on the domestic Israel front. That's about it. Just a couple of small anecdotes. You know, Al Al's in real trouble. I think everyone knows that. They haven't been flying. You know, Al Al has stopped flying completely all passenger flights for a while now. The only flights that have been coming in and out of Israel from the States are on United Airlines, actually. United never stopped flying to Israel throughout this whole thing. So that was interesting. Al Al still hasn't started flying, and they will not start flying before July 1st. They essentially, there's a very, very good chance they're going to be state-owned. The company, the government is going to own Al Al again, and buy up, lend it money and buy up all the shares and whatnot. And that's typically how these things are done. Al Al cannot survive. They need tremendous amounts of money, and they're going to get it from the government. And in return, the government's going to own the company. And once the company, please God, is back up on its feet, they'll sell it, you know, on the stock market or whatnot, and they'll recoup their money. But there's no doubt that, you know, Al Al is in a world of trouble, like a lot of airlines are, And, you know, the biggest question that everyone is asking here is, you know, how are Israelis going to start traveling again? You know, I mean, Israelis travel so much. I mean, this is the longest I haven't been on a plane in my 20-year business career. I mean, it's unbelievable. So it's like, when are we going to start traveling again, and how are we going to start traveling? No one feels really safe traveling, right? I mean, even me with my family flying on United, we're very, very nervous to come next month. And I'm not even, you know, let's see if it happens. So, but, you know, there's already, you know, just to give you some numbers, the traffic at Ben-Gurion Airport is down 96%, you know, since this started. So that's basically empty. And, you know, there's Ben-Gurion Airport, the procedures are totally different. You can't walk in unless you have a printed boarding pass, a mask, and gloves. You have to be checked in before you walked in. They spread you, everything I understand is completely spread out in how you check in. You are required to get there 4 hours before the flight. You have to get there 4 hours before the flight. I've heard rumors that they are building a testing center at the airport, you know, to test everyone that leaves, but I haven't heard really anything else about that. And so it's a graveyard there. There's not a lot of activity there. There are very few flights. The only flights Al Al are taking are cargo flights from around the world, or to pick up Israelis that are stranded, which has happened quite a bit. Israelis have been stranded and flown home from Morocco and, you know, Colombia and everywhere around the world. The Morocco extraction was quite an interesting one, I believe, because it involved the private Jewish community of the diaspora and so forth facilitating that. So, and unfortunately, at the last minute, it leaked to the media, and that delayed it by like a month. So I heard that the Israelis were like sleeping any way they could, while they got it back on track. So that was interesting as well. Other than that, I think we should talk about, the situation in the States, with regard to Israel. It's just shocking there. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some that disagree, but, I've always grown up, with the clear idea of what anti-Semitism is in terms of, the KKK and neo-Nazis and white supremacists and so forth. But I did not have a full appreciation for the anti-Semitism on the left. And it's much more sophisticated and much tougher to identify. The anti-Semitism on the right, basically, there is anti-Semitism against, the individual Jew and all these conspiracy theories, and they are proud anti-Semites on the right. They scream it, wave flags, post, so forth. On the left, there's blatant anti-Semitism against the only Jewish country in the world and the largest Jewish community, and they do not believe they're anti-Semitic, and they do not acknowledge it. They view themselves as being for social justice and so forth, and Israel does not fit into that, and so everything that is in Israel is bad. And I'm kind of living this through my niece that goes to UCSD, and there's a letter circulating there to the regents, which is just appalling. And I see stuff like this all the time that a lot of her friends have signed, and basically it says, as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, they're writing. And they go on about injustice in the Black community, which is totally understandable. But then very quickly, it just turns towards Israel, the whole letter. And I'm happy to actually share it with everyone. I'll send it. It turns towards Israel and about how the Israeli terrorists trained, the Minneapolis police, and they trained them how to put knees on this guy, on George's neck, and basically we're committing genocide and so forth. And this, unfortunately, is the mainstream view in the progressive movement. And I do not, when I say progressive, I don't mean the left, and I don't mean liberal. In progressive is something different. There is vile anti-Semitism towards Israel. And it's the reason why it's so hard to identify as anti-Semitism is because, much like Iran says, we love Jews. We have Jews in Iran. We love Jewish people. We love the Jewish religion. We just do not believe in Israel, and we think Israel is evil. So you love Jews, but you don't like the only Jewish country in the world, but you hate the only Jewish country. And that's a very simple but sophisticated position. And basically, if you destroy Israel, I believe, you're going to destroy the Jewish people. And so it's another way of destroying Jews. It's just, for you to believe that Jews are legitimate, but Jewish people don't have the legitimate right to their own country or their own history, then that's anti-Semitism. Every other people in the world have the right to their own nationalism and to be nationalistic and to have their own country. But Jews, excuse me, your only religion, you're not a people, you're not a history, and you don't deserve your own country, and you're illegitimate. Excuse me, let me grab some water quickly. Oh, I got something caught in my throat.
If anybody has questions, go ahead and put things in the mute. Put things in the chat, because we're staying on mute. That's what I meant to say.
So, excuse me. So we need to be cognizant of what's happening, because I think it's safe to, I know it's very sensitive to talk about in the States, but I think it's safe to assume that while a lot of this activity in the States is centered around social justice and reforming police and the terrible things that are happening in the African American and Black community, there's a lot of other issues that are being conflated into this here. And this letter from, the UCSD student, couldn't be a better example of this, of just conflating so many issues, social justice issues with the Black community and anti-Semitic views against Israel. And so, at some point, I think as an Israeli, and if you're an Israeli reading this letter, it's so absurd, that it's not something that Israel is doing that this person hates Israel. It's who Israel is. So there is nothing that Israel can do to satisfy this person or to convince this person that Israel has a legitimate right to exist. And that's it. The BDS movement, which is, just as anti-Semitic, it's very simple, right? We don't agree with some of the things Israel does, how it treats Palestinians, so we want to boycott them. But really, it's denying Israel's legitimacy. And the leader of the BDS just gave a very, very clear interview saying basically, we just don't believe Israel has a right to exist. That's the point of BDS. And so we need to be careful, and we need to shout out things clearly, and especially anti-Semitism. And, people like my niece, who's 19 years old, is caught in a very difficult position. She's repulsed by this letter. She's a proud Jew. She wants to come and study in Israel. And some of her friends have signed it, and she doesn't know what to do. And so we need to be very cognizant that there is a generation, or there is a lot of younger people out there that are being impacted by these views. Someone said this idea has been led and sprouted by the Palestinian lobby, and of course Farrakhan. Yeah, I mean, honestly, Farrakhan is he's an easily identifiable anti-Semite, and I don't view him nearly as dangerous as the anti-Semitism of BDS. It's so sophisticated and so difficult to explain. And if you're, there's a saying in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing, and a guy waving a Nazi flag, or Louis Farrakhan, doesn't need any explanation that he's anti-Semitic. But a college student that is, I was on University of Texas campus, and there was a massive anti-Israel presence there, and they just hate Jews in Israel so much, Israel and the Jews that live there so much. And, to explain why, Israel is not against Palestinians and why these people actually don't acknowledge Israel's existence, that's a lot of explanation. It's like Bill Clinton said, a simple lie is much easier to explain than a complicated truth. And so, it's hard, it's a hard issue. And the only way to confront it is to call it for what it is and draw some lines in the center, that it is absolutely anti-Semitism. Are there any other questions? This is the problem with Zoom. Usually I can sort of feel the room and hands go up as we speak. So are there any other questions? Because those are actually the 4 points that I want to speak about, but I have plenty of time. I have a whole nother half an hour if you want to discuss anything more, especially in the San Diego Jewish community there. I see some people typing.
If you don't know how to use the chat feature, you can open it from the bottom of your screen where there's the menu where you show your the mute and stop video, where you can turn on and off your video, and you click on the feature chat and a box appears next to all the tiles. Or if you don't know how to do that, raise your hand and I will look at your picture and unmute you.
Yeah, why don't we do that? If you want to raise your hand and you can look at the box and see if, and you can unmute them. And a couple of these boxes are not
Unmutable.
Unmutable. What question was, what's the feeling in Israel about the U.S. after the murder of George? Listen, I can tell you something. People here are in 100% shock at what's happening in the U.S. I mean, there's a strong connection between Israel and the U.S. And I would say that, Israelis generally look up to the U.S. in a lot of ways, and always have. And to see what's happening in the U.S. is crazy. to a lot of Israelis, a lot. You know, I think most Israelis are not in tune with if you take the average Israeli that's not an international mind or person or whatever, they're not reading CNN, they're not reading Fox, they're not reading they're not looking at news, they're looking at the Israeli news where there's a snippet of what's happening in America. And, you know, part of them are shocked and part of them's like, oh, Trump's good for Israel, better than Obama, so who cares, you know, type of thing. But the people that are following what's happening in America are just in shock at the images and what they're seeing. And I have to say, for me, it's just, it's very weird because, you know, this is the longest I've been out of America. I was in New York in February, believe it or not. How I didn't get corona, I'm not sure, but I was in New York in February for an intense work trip. But before that, it had been a while. So, you know, usually I'm in Israel and I'm in Israel. I'm in the States several times a year, even a quarter, and I'm in touch with what's going on there. But to speak to people in the States, I don't know. I mean, things don't seem to match up. And I think part of it has to do with, even when you watch Fox News, I only get Fox and CNN. So I try to watch as little news as possible and only read my news because watching news just causes anxiety. And so I read my news. But when I do turn on the news every couple of days, the national headlines are horrendous. I'm just going to say, are completely horrendous. You know, now I get the local headlines from San Diego, and I understand COVID, the community's dealt with COVID very well there. And, you know, there haven't been a lot of destruction or riots. So, you know, I hear from San Diego, things are okay. I hear from Austin, things are okay. I was just on a Zoom before you guys with Minneapolis. That's all boarded up and they've gone through 2 weeks of riots. And so, you know, it's when you are not following the States that closely and you only rely on the national headlines on CNN or Fox, it's horrendous right now for the States. Just absolutely horrendous. Just one horrendous headline. It looks like chaos from the outside. It really does, unfortunately. And people can't believe what's happening. I've heard from 3 Israelis, not American Israelis. It's very sad what's happening in the States, you know, because people do love the States here. So I don't know what else to tell you other than that. There hasn't been a tremendous amount of backlash in terms of local protesting here. There's been protests against Bibi. There has been some protests against violence against women because, you know, this global quarantine has really caused an uptick in domestic violence. So there's been protests against that. But in terms of police brutality and stuff like that, it has not been a national response to it at all, which is interesting, you know, which is very interesting. I think that if I can also give my opinion, I mean, it's no secret that the killing of George Floyd, you know, was horrendous, haunting to see the video, number one. I'm not sure anyone can see the video. But it was like a you know, match to the Tinder, you know, because everyone had been inside for 2 months in the world. Everyone is anxious and pissed off, for lack of a better term. They're suffering economically, and they do not. There's a trend going around the globe that you just don't trust government organizations or institutions anymore. And so now this was a horrendous murder that just sort of brought all of those things to the surface all at once. And so that's why you're getting a lot of issues that are coming out at the worst possible time. It's just amazing to see one murder in Minneapolis by a horrendous couple of policemen, you know, set this off around the world. It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Someone just said, the host has to unmute us. We cannot unmute ourselves. I think if you want Melanie to unmute, you got to wave your hand or.
That way we don't talk over one another.
Yes. I mean, you can try and mute everyone, but I think that's going to descend into something bad. I see someone has a question. Yvonne Lazar has a question.
Go ahead, Yvonne, unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. You know, I am somewhat of a liberal, more of a moderate. And I am horrified, as you were discussing the progressive wing of the Democrat. Of course, I'm going to vote for Biden. I can't imagine another 4 years out there with Trump. But what scares me, what terrifies me, in fact, my family were from Germany. And it started like this here. The Jews were the leaders of society. They were the liberals of society. They were exactly like the American population here. Exactly the same demographic, exactly the same liberal, educated, advanced ideas for freedom and for everything. And yet it didn't protect them. And I see American, and when I speak to my mostly East Coast New Yorker friends who are very liberal, they don't see this at all. And I've had this said to me many, many times, that they first are all Americans, secondly Jews. I think the two can be side by side. I don't think it has to be one or the other. But it scares me. And I think that the anti-Semitism that we're experiencing will grow. And, and unfortunately, the people who come to our defense are the fundamentalists who really are not,
Right.
We know that their agenda is, yes, the Jews are, God's chosen people, but in the event there will be Armageddon.
Armageddon, right. Yeah.
And all the Jews will come to accept Jesus Christ. That's the fundamentalist theory.
Those are some tough choices.
So the people who are the most friendly to us now, the most supportive, are the ones who actually foresee the end of Judaism.
There's no doubt the relationship between evangelicals and Israel is a sensitive one, and that actually there was a huge story here a couple weeks ago about there was somehow an evangelical group got a a Christian sort of prophesizing TV station on the air. I don't know how it happened, but somehow they got approval or something. Maybe they didn't say what it was, and they started broadcasting. And there is a very, 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 strong unwritten rule, and it's probably even written rule, I think. This whole country is, survives on a tip of a pin by status quo, right? And there's some things that are really like sacrosanct, and not proselytizing in Israel is one of them. And so it crossed a huge line, and it really caused an issue between, not a big issue, but it was an issue between, the fundamentalists or not. To go back to your answer about, liberal and left as well, and I'm certainly not right wing. I voted for Gantz proudly all 3 times. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Bibi, but I think the issue on the left is one of just acknowledgement. I have a very, very, one of my closest friends in the world is a conservative rabbi in New England. Came to Israel to study. He loves Israel, but he's very liberal and he's very left, which is fine. But I have a lot of left positions, but I don't consider myself a liberal. And I think when you say liberal, it's almost like a religion now, and he really does everything in his world he can justify and filter through the liberal lens. And we got into a heated discussion about anti-Semitism, and he tried to explain to me, listen, there is anti-Semitism on the left, but who's it really hurt? Who's it really hurt? The anti-Semitism on the right is much more dangerous. That's the guy that walked into the synagogue in Poway and killed this wonderful lady, and so forth and so forth. And I said, are you really trying to say to me that there is good anti-Semitism and bad anti-Semitism? I said, it's all going to come, it's all the same circle. I said, it's all part of the same hatred. And I said, when you go to the New York Times and it's printing anti-Semitism, it's printing right-wing anti-Semitism in quotes in a left-wing paper, and so I said, there is no way you can sit here and justify that there's good and bad anti-Semitism. And I said, and from where I sit, I'm not worried about the individual wacko right-wing group with guns. I said, those guys are pretty easy to defeat. I'm worried about the groups that give legitimacy to Hezbollah and Hamas, like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, that give legitimacy to these terrorist groups that fire rockets at my homes. You know, and they fire those rockets with impunity because they know they've got the backing and the sympathy of a large part of the left-wing groups across the world. And, you know, and it was just shocking. And that was a very good example of how, and this was last year. So, you know, this was last year. So, you know, this is another example of how we have to be careful how much we justify. You know, just like on the right, people are trying to justify and explain away some of the horrendous things Trump does. We have to be careful on the left how much we justify all the horrendous things that are being done there as well. You know, the left are not pure as the driven snow, just like the right are not either. For that's for sure. So yeah, it's a sensitive time, and one thing is for sure, that there is definitely a silent majority in the center of Israel and the U.S., but it's got no voice. Absolutely no
That's
voice.
exactly it. Yeah.
It's got no voice on either side in either country. You know, and it's a problem. You know, if you want to, I always think that the political situation in Israel is a foreshadowing of what's happening in the States. There is no left wing in Israel anymore. There's no left wing. The labor movement of Ben-Gurion, who used to rule the country for years, has joined Bibi's government with the fewest possible seats ever, and that will be the end of it. They will not cross the election threshold to get the minimum amount of votes to be a party. So there is literally no left wing in Israel anymore. And I'm telling you, if the Democrats lose in November, which they very well could, and I think there's a very good chance they will, that will be the same moment of reckoning. It will not be because of Trump's voters, it's because the Democrats can't figure out why they lost. The left has not figured it out. Since the end of the Oslo Accords, the left has not figured it out in Israel, and it's been a slow decline. And you know, I think that the Democrats in the U.S. need to take some stock about what they're not seeing. They're not seeing something, you know, because most of the people I know are either diehard Trump fans, and nothing you can do or he will do will change their mind. But a lot of other people I meet can't stand Trump and don't want to vote for him, but can't bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden for some reason, you know, and that's a shame, you know, when you've got someone like Trump out there. Any other questions? Hi, Shirley. I grew up with Shirley's son from the Jewish Academy when I was 9 and moved to San Diego. I was the first person I saw walking into school my first day. And your other son lives in Israel too. I see Mark.
Is that Shirley Serlin? Is that Shirley Serlin? I can't see. Oh, hi, Shirley. We also know each other from the Jewish Academy. My daughter was in the first kindergarten class, and I worked in the office.
Nice. Any other questions? All right, guys, it was a heavy. I don't mean to. Usually I like to end on an optimistic note. We all will be okay. But I can tell you from my personal standpoint that and it's got nothing really to do with America, but you know, it's been 5 years since we've been here in another month, and it's really been the best decision we've made. And I don't say that about anything negative about America. We miss the States and my family and everything, but it's just, it's a wonderful place to be and raise kids and have a family here.
Thank you so much for providing us this view from the front lines in Israel, Mark.
Yeah, the front lines.
Yep.
I mean,
from the office of.
yeah, exactly.
Don't miss our upcoming JCC Senior Department events, including the third in our three-part series of Survival, Resilience, and Hope with Holocaust survivor Fanny Leibovitz on Thursday, June 25th at 1:30. Our JCC Social Circles Book Club will discuss The Accidental Anarchist on Wednesday, June 24th at 2 p.m. And the Movie Club will discuss the film The Marriage Story on Tuesday, June 30th at 4 p.m. If you've not yet registered for any of these, either email me or you can click on the links that were in the June events email blast that we sent out May 28th. And thank you so much for attending. I can unmute everybody now, and then we can all clap. Let's see, how do I do this? Unmute selves. Unmute all. Try to do unmute all. Okay. I'm still learning Zoom, you guys. Sarah usually helps me with. Sarah moved into our camp now, so. Okay. Thank you so, so much, Mark and everybody. You can unmute
Well,
yourselves.
Thank you to Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you, Mark. Thank you so much. Good
Mark
luck.
didn't unmute. There
Oh,
we go.
sorry. I said thank you very much. Shavua tov and Shabbat shalom.
Wonderful.
Fun.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Love.
Bye.
Mark, if you'll send me the letter that you had mentioned that your niece wrote, I
Oh,
can
yeah.
forward it to all the participants.
I will do that right now.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank
And we'll also
you.
send a recording of this if you want to share this too. So thank you.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.